My name is Joe Woodham from Torii. Welcome to our vlog series, All Things Design. Today I'm joined by Zendesk Senior Director of Product Design, Nick Taranto-Grimes. Thanks for joining me today, Nick.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Over the last 10 years, you've worked for some pretty big brands like August, Xero, and Zendesk. Can you tell us about your career as a designer?
Sure. I guess, for me, it started somewhat young. I think I was attracted to more of those kind of creative classes and endeavors, through middle and senior school. And I kind of, did a couple of subjects there in like year 12 on media and visual communication and design and, working on sort of magazine designs and, architectural concepts, short videos and documentaries and those sorts of things. So I guess I kind of set the direction for where I went in, following that. And I did a degree in communication design at Swinburne here in Melbourne, which was a really great experience, and just started honing and refining a lot of those kind of fundamental, ultimately graphic design skills, a little bit more broad, in some other areas as well. Working with a lot of talented people. I did a year of exchange, studied in Dusseldorf in Germany, which was a really great experience and got a different taste of design, really quite a step up, I think, in a few areas in terms of quality and expectations. And that was great as I sort of wrapped up there. So that was kind of what happened on the education front, and ultimately came back to Melbourne as a designer, sort of graduating, then thinking, I've got to get a job now. This is scary, and I've just been kind of designing in a bubble. It's very different working as a student, compared to a commercial environment. And so I was fortunate enough to get a job at a small design studio at that time, and ultimately was trained up by a really talented illustrator and visual designer. And it was just lots of, I think what really needs to happen with a lot of designers in any role really, but one-on-one coaching, sitting inside at the time, Creative Suite, InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, and learning how to kind of visualize things, different styles, learning how to design advertisements, basic things at the time. But like I said, very different working as a student to sort of contributing as a designer in a world where you need to create outcomes for people that want to pay you money. So I was really lucky to get that initial role and kind of just got trained up, and then started to, doing a little bit of web-based design, and then some application design, ultimately for some software from that group that's eventually formed into a product called Schoolbox, still built out of Melbourne. Great team. From there, I dabbled a little bit more in agency land at August for a brief period of time. And I think, as most designers do, I think there's this allure, when you're working on sort of more in that sort of more waterfall, project-based approach in an agency environment. You start thinking, oh wow, I'd really like to iterate. I'd really like to refine these things and not just hand them off immediately. So it's like, I need to work on a product. I need to work on something that I can chip away at. I'm going to get that there. And so, I took a job at Xero, which was really exciting. Really tiny team. There were two of us in Melbourne at the time, and started working with the bulk of the team, which was over in Wellington or around NZ. Yeah. Met some great people. We were doing some unique things there. We were actually designing in Flash, interestingly enough, which was a unique thing, but, really broke things down to step by step, painful at times, but also insightful. And then started, traveling a lot to the US, working on payroll. There was a really, the Australian market had a really great, or received the payroll offering from Xero really well, and started getting to work on trying to make that happen in the US. Started meeting some really interesting people, and kind of getting a taste of that kind of Silicon Valley core, that tech feeling, which is really unique over there. I'm kind of giving you the whole life story here.
That's good. I like it. Thank you.
No worries. Eventually transitioned into a role at Zendesk, and that's where I've been for, really quite a while now, for sort of 8+ years. Joined as an individual contributor, here in Melbourne as our first designer. The creative team, as it was known then, because it was a combination of product and brand, was pretty small, mostly based over in SF. A couple of people, myself here, a range of acquisitions. We had a team that just joined in Singapore and some people in Dublin as well, and sort of helped grow out the team locally here and then more broadly over that time. And I've worked in just, a range of roles, but ultimately now leading, a decent sized team across kind of two areas of Zendesk's core business. That's it in a nutshell.
Kind of smoothly leads on to the next question, because you mentioned you've been with Zendesk for quite a period of time, and you were the first designer. So it's been a pretty big journey. I could imagine it's been a pretty big journey. I've watched from the outset in terms of the growth from, I guess, the whole product side of things there. But starting your journey there as a product designer and moving your way into a leadership role, what inspired you to sort of go on that journey? And going back to one of your first points, did you have people in other regions helping you on that journey from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, good question. I think, to start with, it wasn't as much of a decision as a necessity, and I was in that fortunate place where I think a lot of people that want to propel into some, leadership can happen in a range of areas. That's really important. You don't need to be managing people to be leading. Some of our best leaders are individual, best or most capable, most impactful leaders are individual contributors. But I kind of transitioned into management more because it kind of got to the point where, I couldn't do all the things that needed to get done. Fortunate to be part of a high growth tech company that had the capacity to hire. And so I built that initial trust with, my manager at the time, who was based over in SF, and, fortunately had a lot of his support and the broader kind of leadership group support there, as well as some of our emerging or existing leaders here in Melbourne in different functions. Quickly got to work, I guess, on then trying to, started with one person and started to just slowly build, and it was quieter in those first few years. I think, we were 3 to 4 and then it really started to pick up over the years as we kept on growing. We had a pretty big engineering presence here already, so we were playing catch up a little bit, and there's only so much you can do with one person, so much to do. We're part of one team from a design perspective, but when you're building a design practice, as part of that one team in a different location, you're kind of establishing a new practice. And so our product development processes have always, they're more consistent these days, but they were in a state of evolution. So there was a different flavor to each location, and that needs to be defined. Somebody needs to help create that. So that's what I kind of started off doing.
Yep. I just remember it was Jason Smale, the person I could remember started the engineering practice probably similar time to when you joined. Do you work very closely with him?
Yeah, we did in the early days. Jason was involved in my interview panel, and I think it started a year or two early and started building out a really great team. And so worked a little bit with Jason, and it was a while ago now.
Yeah. I guess sometimes the road to leadership can be slightly lonely. Is there any sort of people that you surround yourself from a mentorship perspective that ever gave you a piece of advice that sort of helped shape your career as a design leader?
A lot. And I think, it's a really good point. It can be very lonely as a manager, or, as a leader. Fortunately, we had a big team, across the board at Zendesk, particularly now, but even over the years, thousands of employees, hundreds of people locally here. So there are always people to work with, to check in with. We had really great support practices here, and I know a lot of companies do, but even just with our people ops, having great relationships with people ops to help talk through challenges and work through things. But I think, I've been really fortunate in a lot of the sort of managers, coaches, mentors that I've had over the years. I guess a few things probably come to mind. One thing I think is a little small, but it's kind of interesting. The past manager and I were talking once, and I must have just left a meeting and was explaining something and had to apologize for being late. And my boss at the time was kind of like, well, you're a director. You don't apologize. It's actually thanks for your patience. And it was a little thing. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. And say what you will around whether you should be apologizing for being late or not. I think the meaning behind it for me, or what it helped me realize, is that particularly as somebody that was an emerging leader that was getting more, I guess, experience from a title perspective and managing a growing team, it's really important that you play the part and be confident in your role. I think that it's really easy, particularly for new managers, and at this was sort of feedback that I got a while after starting management, but I think it's easy as a new manager to second guess yourself, and to have imposter syndrome. And so it was that sort of small thing that made me realize, it's really important that you play the part and, show others that you've got it, and you can get things done.
How do you do that in a humble way sometimes if you're transitioning from like a senior designer through to that leadership role for the first time? How do you play it in a humble way where you are still learning I guess the skills that you need to become an effective leader? So how do you do that in a way that doesn't, I guess, rub people up the wrong way, I suppose?
Yeah, it's tough. It's delicate, right? Influence, trust, respect, particularly in large organizations where there's lots of people that you're doing this with, and particularly in a remote world, where you don't have, for me, I really enjoy being, face to face with people, and it's something that I can be good at, in working with people like that. So it's definitely challenging. I'm working through that with a team member at the moment, and that transition is tough. I think it's fortunate if you come from a place where you're already widely respected by your team, even if you are an individual contributor, and so you're transitioning into a management role. And so I think, if you're part of a team already and you've already been able to establish a reputation, that's generally going to help you. But I think it's a slow burn. You've got to build trust with people, right? Like, it doesn't happen immediately. It's like, hey, invite me to all the things. And it's like, I can invite you to everything and you can be everywhere, but it doesn't mean that this person's going to know you. They're going to listen to you and that sort of thing. So I think it is a slow process, but coming from that place of past experience or credibility is really helpful. If you're joining a new organization, yeah, it's the same thing, right? But I guess you're not probably seeing that transition as often from organization, joining a new organization as an INC and taking on a management role. Possibly, I'm sure it happens here and there. But I think that's part of it.
Yeah. So I find it for me, transitioning into management, I found the biggest thing was being able to define a role and have a quantifiable outcome into a people leadership role where maybe you didn't fully understand what the outputs necessarily were going to be. I found that challenging to get my head around. Did you have any issues with that as you went through those leadership ranks, especially in, I guess, leading the practice in Melbourne?
In terms of sort of being clear on like what the
tangible outcome might be
of taking on a new role, a new responsibility, or being a manager?
Yeah, being a manager, people leader, like sometimes it's this selfless thing, right?
Yeah, it can be. I think sometimes it can feel like, I was talking with a colleague recently, based in Europe, and we were describing it as sort of just like, it's just kind of juggling plates a lot of the time, and sometimes it can feel like you're not doing anything when in fact you're actually doing a lot. And there's a lot of subtlety to helping teams succeed. So yeah, I think quantifying success is challenging. Ideally, you're having those conversations, with your manager. They're setting really expectations, or the business has expectations. But in my experience as well, though, that definition does take time to get defined, and particularly when you're joining a high growth organization, if some of those operational things or those expectations might not always exist. They might not always be transparent, and it's just like, hey, you've been hired, like, go. Which is more often the case than not, which isn't great. We need to do better than that, I think, as leaders and as companies when we scale and grow. But yeah, I think you should be looking for tangible things to establish a framework for yourself on what success and output looks like, and measuring against those as a fallback. But I totally agree, it can be intangible at times and tough.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess if you've got clear objectives, you know what you're moving towards, which does help. Obviously growing a very sizable design practice in Melbourne. What are the key attributes that you've generally looked for when you're looking for a great designer? What makes a great designer for you?
Oh, good question. I mean, so many things, and I think that it's dependent, I guess, on the, what you're looking for, what like a great designer to fill a certain role at a certain company at a certain period of time, might not be the great designer that you need at a different time or in a different place. But I think like talking generally, perhaps we could start like early career, designers, people that are just breaking in. I think there's just a bunch of stuff that we look for. And I'm kind of reflecting now on even some of the interns that we have operating across the team, and some of the designers that we've had that have joined in that sort of associate and entry level junior roles. I guess they've, usually just got some basic things like core design capabilities, which funnily enough can be hard to come by these days. I think there is a push from a lot of, it's very easy to understand design process and the double diamond and different approaches and frameworks to help do design. But I think the doing and the output piece is really important, or at least I feel it's always been important. Perhaps it got lost along the way. So I think, having somebody that has those core design capabilities, understanding design elements, principles, color, layout, hierarchy. They understand platforms, web, mobile, depending on where they're going to be working. There's kind of those core things. I'd hope that they've got an immense amount of enthusiasm and drive, creativity. I think some of the things that I see is, in successful designers, their ability to sort of really quickly visualize things. More often than not, I think design and UX is always in a state of, in terms of defining what design is, what product design is, UX. It's a rich topic. People are always going back and forth. Like, is it an art? Is it a science? But I think, your ability to visualize things, to produce things, to help solve problems, ultimately, problem-solving skills are just crucial. Critical thinking, those sorts of things. I think those are some of the basics that you're ultimately looking for when you're sort of getting started. I think as you sort of progress as an IC, then, what we're looking for is, or what I'm looking for is, again, super role centric and role specific, which is kind of where we're at as an organization. And I think as design teams mature and get bigger, you're looking for more niche roles than you would perhaps as a smaller group starting up, where you need somebody to wear many hats. You're looking for subject matter experts in things like accessibility, design systems design, information architecture, that sort of thing. And I think that specialty is something that you're then looking for those more experienced team members to be able to explain, to coach. There's an immense thing on storytelling as well, presentation, facilitation here. I think at most design organizations, you're always trying to, ideally your task with solving user problems, and it's the designer's job to say, hey, this is the best way we can do it. But there is still an element of selling, needing to sell, communicate. So, we probably overuse presentation decks and things like that, but being able to tell a story in a range of formats is just immensely crucial. So I think that's another thing. And then, as you then push into management, you'd hope that you have a lot of the things that I've mentioned already. And I guess it depends on the way that your team works, and your expectations of a manager. Some managers are much more hands-on, and teams expect leaders to be much more hands-on and in the weeds. Well, not in the weeds, but really more design-centric. In others, design management roles can be more operational. But I think those soft skills become really crucial then. Your ability to work with anyone and everyone, flexibility, adaptability, those sorts of capabilities are really crucial, I think, as you transition to that sort of stuff.
Really interested. You mentioned early on in your career, you were lucky and you got to work with someone who was able to sort of show you what to do, when to do it, and help you hone your skill set early on in your career. Given, I guess, how we work and a lot of it's remote these days, how are you successfully bringing on interns at Zendesk and wrapping that support framework around them to ensure that they have the right tools at the right time? Like, how are you managing that?
Yeah, this is a good one. And I think it's kind of a lot of what you expect, a lot of what you do in the office, but remotely. But I think there's a lot of depth to that. So like whenever we have I'm thinking of one intern we have on our team sort of based across Northern America and sort of, Europe. And there's a lot of, engagement on Slack, people staying in tune, staying connected there, lots of Zooms. We utilize, I think the two key things are rituals and tooling, really. So, I mean, you need to have the right rituals already in place to foster connection with your design team or your cross-functional teams as well. And they should already be in place. And that's things like, different forms of critique, talking about performance regularly, those sorts of things. And then on the tooling side, it's like, Figma as the obvious example, really brilliant collaborative tool, and it's very easy. You need to set the expectation super early that, that feedback is going to be regular and, and frequent, and looking at design, talking about design, sharing design is just so easy in those sorts of, in a tool like Figma as an example, co-designing and that sort of thing. So, I think we're definitely still able to provide that same level of coaching that I described. It's just a little different, like sitting next to someone in front of a computer, right? And seeing them quickly utilize all of the shortcuts on their keyboard. If that's what we're talking about, if we're talking about polishing UI or details or working in a tool like Figma or any tool really, it's a little different when you can see that face to face, obviously, versus like, another Zoom call, because there's no shortage of them for everybody these days. So it's possible, but I think you got to have the right things in place, and we do, and I think most teams should, and that's rituals, and they should be well defined, and that's a whole nother conversation, and then the right tooling. And I think with the progression of tooling over the past 10 years or so, it's just, we're pretty fortunate.
Yep. No, I agree. It's definitely made things a lot easier. But who would have thought we would hiring people left, right, and center without ever meeting them? And it's become quite a thing over the last 2 years. So I think things have come forward leaps and bounds. But that probably leads me on to the final question. You've obviously been in the design space for quite a while. What trends do you see emerging at the moment that are exciting you?
Yeah, trends. I think I kind of just touched on one. I might expand on it a little more, but I think, one of the core attributes that I should have mentioned, in terms of what makes a great designer is your ability to, your willingness to receive and hear feedback and take it on. And I think that, there's a level of maturity from a company, a design team, and an individual perspective that's required to help that feedback or help people be in an environment where that is the case. So yeah, I think this concept of sort of collaboration in design I don't think it's a trend, right? It's like, it's commonplace now, but as you look at big teams, literally got people sitting in Figma together, like designing interfaces together, editing and riffing ideas, like, hey, I was just in Slack earlier, we're talking about, a piece of design that needs some feedback. And one of our designers had posted an example link to Figma. Everyone's going back and forth on feedback in Slack and then transitioning into Figma. You can see cursors moving around, different concepts being prepared. So I think there is this kind of, one of the attributes and values at Zendesk that we've kind of stuck to a lot, I think, particularly with a lot of the people we've hired, is humbleness, humble and confident. And so I think you need to be humble and you need to be willing to take that feedback and share early and often. I feel like generally, like, as an industry, I feel like we're in a very different place. I think if you looked back, and perhaps it's got a little something to do with smaller teams, and sort of, more entry-level designers, I guess. But I think that what you'll probably find is that over the past, 10 plus years, 15 years, we've probably seen a real cultural change, within design, particularly tech companies, where, designing together, taking on feedback, working with multiple stakeholders is much easier and much more widely accepted. I think initially it was very easy to hire a designer that was incredible, but they couldn't work with anybody. That's still the case. But I think that it's, as an industry, we've moved forward. So I would, not quite a trend, but I think something that I've definitely noticed over the past years.
Yeah. No, I definitely think the collaboration between, engineers and designers has come leaps and bounds in the last couple of years. And I think it's been a good thing for design as a whole. But Nick, that wraps up all of my questions. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Obviously, you head up design at Zendesk. If anyone's looking, what's the best way of reaching you?
Look, you can look online at our job board. We have a little Zendesk design Instagram page as well. Feel free to ping us there or find me on LinkedIn. Always interested in catching up with anybody trying to get into the industry or looking to connect.
Perfect. Nick, once again, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.